Okay, so when you picture ancient Egypt, uh, beyond the obvious things like pyramids and pharaohs, there's this really deep connection to their life source, the Nile.
Absolutely.
And to really get that, we need to talk about something called a Nilometer,
Mm-hmm.
which was basically how ancient Egyptians measured the Nile's water level during the flood season each year.
Right. And this wasn't just, for interest. It was absolutely vital.
Vital for farming.
Exactly. Predicting the harvest, figuring out taxes. It all tied back to that annual flood. The Nilometer gave them the crucial data.
Okay, so by checking the water's clarity, its height, they could guess how big the flood would be.
That's the idea. A big flood meant more fertile silt, better irrigation, basically a good year. A low flood.
In trouble. Famine? Maybe.
Potentially,
Yeah.
yes, or at least hardship. So measuring it was critical planning.
So how did these things actually work? Were they all, like, the same design?
No, not at all. The basic function was the same measure, the water level, but the designs really varied. Some were quite simple, almost like stairs, stepped constructions going right down to the river. You could just visually see the level.
Easy enough.
But others were more complex. Underground wells, for instance, connected to the Nile, often with very precise mathematical markings.
Wow.
And remember, Herodotus mentioned the flooding went way beyond just the delta, so they needed these measurements all along the river.
Right, because the flood brought that essential silt, the fertilizer for the whole region.
Precisely, the foundation of their agriculture.
So stairs on the bank or these intricate wells.
Mm-hmm.
It really shows how they adapted, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Depending on where they were along the Nile.
It does. And we know of several locations. Elephantine Island down in Aswan is a famous one.
I've heard of that one.
Roda Island in Cairo, too. Its Nilometer was known for being particularly accurate for a long time. Then Tanis in the Delta, even the Serapeum of Alexandria had one, though it's not well preserved.
And the local geology matter for building them.
Oh, definitely. Down south, like at Elephantine, you've got solid bedrock. So they could carve relatively short tunnels to connect the well to the river.
Makes sense.
But up in the delta, it's all loose, silty soil, alluvial sediments. Building a stable structure there, especially one connected to the fluctuating river, required totally different engineering, different challenges, different solutions.
Okay, that brings us to a specific discovery you mentioned was quite important, the one at Sui, near Mendes.
Yes, the Smooey find in 2010, that was pretty significant. They were putting in a water pumping station, I think, and stumbled upon this really well-preserved delta nilometer.
Wow. Just stumble upon it.
Happens more than you'd think.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about the Smee one is how its architecture seems so specifically adapted.
Adapted how?
Well, it seems tied into the local religious, economic, and political setup of the time.
Okay, hang on. Religious, economic, and political. How does a measuring tool get tied into all that?
Well, think about the history there. Mendes, the nearby city, was a major political player, especially during the Third Intermediate period.
Right, when Egypt was a bit fragmented.
Exactly. And Mendes stayed important later, under the Ptolemies, the Greek dynasty after Alexander the Great. But eventually, Kanmui, nearby, seems to have become more prominent.
Why the shift?
Could be a few reasons. Maybe the Nile shifted its course slightly, making Smui's harbor better. Or maybe the Ptolemaic rulers deliberately invested more in Smui. Strategic reasons, perhaps.
Okay. And the Nilometer fits into this Ptolemaic period.
It seems so. It's built from limestone, and the style points towards the Ptolemaic era, probably 4th to 3rd centuries BC. That's different from later Roman hydraulic works, which often used brick.
And didn't they find an inscription, too?
They did, yes. A dedicatory inscription. It had Greek names and some numbers on it.
Numbers, meaning what? The water levels.
That's one theory, but another strong possibility is that the numbers represent donations. Money given, perhaps for building the Nilometer itself, or maybe for a temple nearby.
Ah, so potentially linking it directly to a temple complex.
It's very plausible. Nilometers were often associated with temples. They weren't just secular measuring devices.
Okay, so this Thamui's example really highlights the importance and maybe even the sacred connections of these structures elsewhere. Now, our main focus is trying to understand the one at Kamambo. Our sources mention it, but not in huge detail, right?
That's right. The source mentions Nilometer on Ambo as a known location, but doesn't elaborate like it does for Tamui.
But even just knowing it was there tells us something.
Absolutely. It tells us Kamambo, with its really significant double temple dedicated to Sobek the crocodile god and Herodes, a form of Horus, was integrated into this vital system.
So it was a key hub.
Clearly, a major socioeconomic center. Having a Nilometer there would have been just as crucial for them as it was anywhere else, for their local agriculture, managing resources, setting local taxes.
It adds another dimension to the temple complex itself, doesn't it? It's not just a religious site detached from daily life.
Not at all. It shows the temple was deeply involved in the practicalities, the rhythms of the Nile, the basis of their economy.
Looking at the bigger picture then, these Nilometers were more than just instruments. They were fundamental.
They really were. They generated the core data that Egyptian society ran on, in many ways, predicting the flood, knowing the potential agricultural output that determined prosperity, it determined tax revenue.
So being able to predict the Nile accurately, that meant stability, authority.
Definitely. It was connected to the power and legitimacy of the rulers. The predictable flood was seen as a divine blessing,
Right.
And the pharaoh's ability, or the temple's ability, to understand and measure that cycle reinforced their authority, their connection to the divine order.
And that reverence for the Nile for water persisted for a long time.
Oh, yes. Even after Egypt became Christian and later Islamic, the cultural importance of the Nile, the sacredness of water, and related rituals carried on in different forms for centuries, it runs incredibly deep.
So tying it all together, these Nilometers, like the one we know existed at Kamambo, even if the details are sparse in this source, they were playing this huge role.
Huge role, yeah. Way beyond just measuring water. They were woven into the economy, the politics, the religion.
Essential infrastructure.
Exactly. For managing the most vital resource they had in a desert landscape. The fact they existed at major centers like Kamambo really speaks volumes about how well the ancient Egyptians understood their environment.
And how clever they were in, well, harnessing it.
Ingenious, really. Their methods for utilizing the Nile's power were quite sophisticated.
It truly makes you appreciate their ingenuity. And structures like the Nilometer, they give us this tangible link, don't they, to how they saw their world, how they understood the river's cycles.
It's a direct connection to their practical knowledge.
So maybe next time you see a picture of Kamambo Temple standing there by the river,
Yeah.
you won't just see the impressive building.
Hopefully you'll also think about the river itself flowing past.
And the clever ways they develop to measure its vital signs, its life-giving floodwaters. It adds a whole other layer to understanding that site.